To the YouTube viewers just joining us, this is the second part of our 2024 off-season discussion, and we're going to be looking at the 2024 NHL Entry Draft. Now, this one, I think there were a lot of expectations on who Ottawa would draft. There were a lot of high-profile defensemen in the top 10, and a lot of discussion about whether the Sens should go after Zane Parekh or Z Buium. There were a number of names tossed out there. I know Tija Ginla was the 1-4 that a lot of Sens fans were really high on, really wanted. He ends up going to Utah at number 6, right before Ottawa's pick. And I think people were a little bit surprised that Ottawa went out and got Carter Yakimchuk from the WHL Calgary Hitmen. He had scored 71 points in 66 games this season, 30 of those being goals. Bit of a feisty customer, and I'll throw it to Bennett this time. Bennett, when Steve Staios came out and said Carter Yakimchuk, what was your reaction?
My gut reaction was, oh no, we've done it again. My gut reaction was that this was another classic Sens reach, that they left skill and talent on the board in exchange for a big body who plays a gritty game and who, fills an organizational need, and that they didn't take the best player available. I think I've come around slightly on Yakemchuk. I think that he can be a useful player and that he can be a serious contributor to this team as like a top 4 defenseman. But I think you'd be very hard pressed to make the argument that if you wanted to stick with right-hand D, that he was the best player available, because I think Zane Parekh was just like the obviously better player, like just like in basically every metric. And I was, to be honest, really surprised that the Sens didn't take him, and disappointed that they didn't take him. I think there are possibly other players that would have also been good in that position, but I think if they really wanted to take a right-hand D in particular, it's puzzling to see that they left Parekh on the board, took Yakemchuk. Parekh just seems more poised. He seems, more affable and interesting as a player and a person than Yakemchuk does. I struggled with this one a fair bit, and I think that, I know some scouts and prospect guys were very high on him. Corey Pronman, I believe, of The Athletic, was one of those guys. I don't know. I don't know about this one. If the idea going into this draft, which I think many people held, was that they wanted the first draft post Dorion to instill a sense of confidence that this team was heading in a better direction with its amateur scouting, this did not set the right tone.
Now, Matt, I know you were higher on Yakimchuk, so I'll let you get to that in a second, but I just want to chime in. And, somebody had talked to me before the draft and said, yes, it's a new front office in there, but the scouting staff is still the same. They're going to have the same biases about which players they like, what character traits, archetype, whatever. And to me, it wasn't surprising, I guess, to see the Sens go out and instead of getting the 6-foot Zane Parekh, getting the 6'3" Carter Yakimchuk. It is interesting because you look at a lot of Stanley Cup contenders, and a lot of them do have a defender who is offensively gifted, who is under 6 feet tall. You look at Adam Fox, you look at Cale Makar, even when he
Eric Brandstrom, for sure.
When he was in his prime, Torrey Krug, he did quite well with Boston. They got to a cup final with him. There are some defenders who are under 6 feet who can really dominate the game offensively. And I think the biggest criticism for Zane Parekh and Carter Yakimchuk were that they had defensive flaws. And it'll be really interesting to see how both players develop, because I think that they'll be compared for quite some time, especially because Ottawa had their pick. And Steve William as well, I think, and Sam Dickinson. All 4 of those guys were available.
And Anton Zelaya. All of them were available. So it was definitely interesting.
And exactly. And we could go on, I think, quite a bit about all the guys available there and whatnot. Apparently, some teams had Yakimchuk as high as 5 on their draft boards, so Ottawa wouldn't have been alone in, being high on this guy. But yeah, it's interesting. I think it's not the player that a lot of fans were lusting over. I know for myself, I was hoping for either Dickinson or Guillaume, but we all pick our favorites going into a draft. And then when our team takes not the guy that we fell in love with, we get frustrated. And we'll see what happens. It's an interesting draft choice, but Matt, I know out of the three of us, you were the most excited about Ottawa taking this guy. So why don't you fill us in on what you know about him?
Definitely. And I'll qualify this by saying there were guys I definitely wanted in front of Yakimchuk. Like I would say Bouillon was probably the top D that I wanted that wasn't named Levshunov. And I also would have loved the Sens to take Berkeley Catton. A former guest of the show, Chris Peters, said his closest comparable in the NHL was Tim Stützle. And I just the idea of having two of those on your team is just is awesome. But Yakimchuk, I remember watching him after Corey Pronman put out his half year prospect rankings, and he was quite high on his list. And he talked about one of the things he had said was he has legitimate game breaking skill. And that is a very high compliment. And Corey Pronman is obviously a really well-respected individual in the scouting circles. And how the Athletic sort of breaks things down is they skating, puck skills, hockey sense, compete, and shot. His skating is NHL average. His hockey sense is NHL average. His puck skills are above NHL average, compete above NHL average, and his shot is high end. And I saw actually on Twitter today, somebody had said every shot Yakimchuk took hit the net. There was no missing the net. And he scored 30 goals in the WHL, which hasn't been done in 30 years. His detractions obviously are his skating and his defensive IQ. But one of the things that I can definitely see Sens fans and the Sens management falling in love with is he's a bastard to play against. He hits things a lot. And he's basically a Brady Tkachuk on defense. He goes out and he takes some stupid penalties from time to time. He gives it his all. And he is always involved in the play. And one of the things he does really well at the same time on the skill side is he can beat guys one-on-one. And these are, elite players he's playing, or, elite compared to the level of play. Like Berkeley Catton said, Yakimchuk's one of the hardest players he's ever played against. And that's a heck of a compliment. I look at this pick as they went on raw potential. And, we can look at the Tyler Boucher pick all we want. What is it, 3 years ago now? And we're still talking about it because it was, it's a fireable offense pick. And it was, that head of scouting was fired. Because frankly, Tyler Boucher won't pan out to what the expectations of a 10th overall pick is. And that is an impact player. And I think Yakimchuk, the ceiling is as high as you can get with an NHL defenseman. Sure, he's not going to be Cale Makar, but he very well could be Alex Pietrangelo. And that's a heck of a defenseman that you want. And he was asked today, what do you think about playing with Jake Sanderson in the future? He said, he's a dream partner of mine. I think he has his issues. but just his style of play is really cool. He's a player you can get up out of your seat for, because he characterizes himself as a two-way defenseman. I think he needs to figure out he needs to work more on one of those ways, but I will say this was a like a very ballsy and like exciting pick for the Sens.
Now, one of the other comparables that I saw for him was Brent Burns, another, big defenseman who can jump up, play offense. And my own comparable, somewhat in jest, is that he's a blue line Brady. He's basically a Brady Tkachuk-esque player who plays defense. And it'll be interesting to see how he develops. And I obviously really hope to see him in the NHL sooner rather than later. And yeah, I can't wait. If he ends up playing with Sanderson, I think that could be a pretty dynamite pairing. And looking forward to seeing where this goes. Again, wasn't my first choice, but he's an Ottawa Senator now. So let's hope for the best. Now, in the second round, I think that's where my biggest question mark was.
Yeah.
And that's where Ottawa got what was described as the most violent player in the draft this year, and a player who has a lust for violence. Apparently, we drafted a guy who's actually the next big upcoming star in the UFC. I'm not really sure, but he's 6'7". It's Gabriel Eliason. He's a guy. He's, not exactly the best when it comes to taking unnecessary penalties. Apparently has a bit of a knack for that. I don't know what to say about this. It was surprising they took him in the second round, but I'll flip it over to Bennett for his reaction to that one.
I mean, my take, and I'm gonna have progressively less to say about each of these guys going forward because
Totally fair.
Honestly, who has the time? But I think the Yakemchuk pick set the tone, and the tone is business as usual for Sens amateur scouting. There is not a guy here under 6'2". Every single one of them, their sort of player profiles read pretty similar. Big guy, uses their body a lot, high compete level, who, pushes guys around and plays with a lot of kind of like grit and grit and muscle. And I think in Carter Yakemchuk, you're getting a guy who also has high-end potential. And well, he wasn't necessarily my pick. I respect taking a swing at a guy because how long have we been saying we want the Sens to do that? Eliason is not a swing. This is just like an immediate head scratcher. What are you doing? What is the purpose of taking a left-handed defenseman that's just like a worse, angrier Tyler Kleven when we already have Tyler Kleven? And I don't know, just extremely weird pick, and just, again, solidified that this is the same old Sens amateur scouting we've come to dislike. And I think that we know who's going to be next on, Andlauer and Staios' chopping block after they dealt with the pro scouts. Because if this was an audition, the amateur scouts did not get the part.
Yeah. I remember seeing that pick come in, and I thought it seemed as though like they had gone right back to what they were. I think Scott Wheeler had said like he knew somebody was going to take him high. And, you really hope that the University of Michigan really like bucks some of these weird things out of his game. Like he was the most undisciplined player that Scott Wheeler has ever seen. And at a point, like how many times are you going to put your team behind the eight ball because you're taking a stupid penalty because you don't know how to defend? So this is where I go back and I say, yeah, this was the old scouting staff regime. The Yakimchuk pick is cool because he has that raw upside. This guy has it feels like his ceiling is as high as his floor is. Like he's not going to grow much more than being a possible sixth defenseman. And like, once again, happy to be totally wrong on this, but like, he doesn't skate very well. He has little to no puck skills, but he hits hard and he goes hard, and that's really all you can say about him.
Forgot to hit that on mute. I think it's tough because you look at other players who are available around there, and like Henry Muse was one who, local kid, second year playing on the 67s, right-handed defenseman as well. If I'm not mistaken. Am I mistaken?
He is a right shot.
Okay. Whew. I was like, did I misremember? 61 points in the OHL this season as a second year player, and he didn't go till the third round. And he's a guy who has upside, who can be projectable as an NHL defenseman.
Yeah.
And he's just one guy. I'm picking him because he played on the local team. Ottawa would have had many chances to scout this player, so that's why I'm using him as a comparable. But yeah, I don't really understand this one. This was actually the only pick of the draft that I was like completely unsure about. But whatever, they're going to take players sometimes, especially with this scouting staff, that you don't agree with. But we'll move on. I'm going to lump the next few guys all together. So in the fourth and fifth round, Ottawa didn't have any late picks. They just had 3 fourth rounders and a fifth rounder. They took Luke Eliason at 104, Javon Moore at 112, and Blake Montgomery at 117. And in the fifth round, took Eric Wallenius at 138. Now, with Luke Eliason, he was kind of a guy who is had an okay season, but then in the playoffs, he broke out. And some scouts said they could see him being a breakout candidate for next year and have high hopes for him. Javon Moore, he is going to University of Minnesota. Big guy, 6'5". Another guy
you'll see this trend, by the way.
Another guy who I think the Ottawa Senators really liked. He played in high school this past season, but looked really damn good. And his nickname is Diesel. That's all you need to know. This guy's probably a friggin' tank. I actually was pretty curious about this player, and a lot of people had good things to say. Actually, all of Ottawa's fourth rounders, the next one I'll mention, Blake Montgomery, he was a second year eligible draft player. And again, 6'4", big boy, but another guy who had a good season in the USHL after having kind of a mediocre season in his draft year, which is why he was passed over. So him kind of having a good season in the USHL really helped to get his name back on the radar of scouts. And then finally, Eric Wallenius, who is going to be quite a project player, but at the end of the day, another defenseman to bring in the system. We'll see what happens. So just lumping all those guys together, because I think as you get further in the draft, there's less information available about some of these guys. But to me, all their fourth rounders seemed like decent guys to take a run at. I think in previous years, the Sens just kind of took players that maybe their scouts fell in love with their character or like one tidbit of their game. Whereas this year, it felt like they actually had more of a focus on things that players could bring to the table aside from just being big. That was obviously a common theme, but with their fourth rounders, it seemed like some of these guys actually have offensive upside, NHL projectability, and that's something that I think has been missing from some of the previous last 3 drafts at least. So nice to see those guys on the board. I'll leave it open for either of you guys to make comments if you have any.
Yeah, I watched a couple of those guys drop, like, Henry Muse dropped, and then most notably, like, Aaron Kiviharju dropped to the 4th round, and actually was picked right around where Javon Moore was. Our 4th round was touted as probably our best one, other than the Yakimchuk pick, which is great. But the Eliason one, a lot of scouts started saying like he picked it up. Javon Moore is one of those players that is extremely projectable, and like even Pronman had him as a guy he could see playing games in the NHL. And Blake Montgomery really kind of reminds me of the Stephen Halliday pick. Sort of puts it together in his second year of eligibility. But like, it would have been really nice to see the Sens, seeing Kiwi Haru, who is a potential lottery pick, going in the 4th round. Obviously, there's risks and question marks with those types of players, but like, that's the opportunity to take an absolute home run swing and just say, yeah, the kid's 5'9.5", but there's a reason why he was touted around here at some point. So let's take a shot. But overall, I found Ottawa's draft pretty meh. It's if we had a 2nd round pick that wasn't as bad, it would have been much better, because like, I can honestly say, like, Gabriel Eliason doesn't jump over some of the prospects we already had. And I was under the impression that our first 3 picks, including that Boston pick that we traded, would immediately skyrocket to the top of our prospect rankings, because our rankings are so barren. And Eliason, in my opinion, does not do that.
Yeah. Youngest player in the draft, though. Lots of runway, boys. Bennett, any general comments you want to make before we
I think I already made some. This was a litmus test for where the amateur scouts are post new ownership. I expect some of them are going to lose their jobs after this, to be quite honest. Perhaps not as a result of this draft only, but just as a result of their track record over the last number of years, and the fact that this didn't seem to indicate much of an improvement. Yeah, just I really would have liked them to pick some guys that will immediately, like you said, slot into our prospect pool above some of the guys that are currently in there, because most of the guys that are currently in there are unlikely to be serious NHL players. And I think Yakemchuk is the only guy they took that you could likely see that happening. So it's a little disappointing.
Yeah. I truly think, like, Simmer tweeted this, and obviously, Simmer can be Simmer, but he had said Don Boyd took on this head scout role just because he's about to retire and they wanted to figure some of this stuff out. But I really would have liked to see more of an imprint of Sean Tierney on this draft. Somebody had mentioned that the Eliason pick was Sean Tierney. And I got to be honest, I'm really not sure how any analytics would suggest that he's the guy there. But hey, who knows?
He was described as being a player who's competent at both ends of the ice, good playoffs. So I imagine that helped.
Yeah. Let's hope their amateur scouting gets better, and same with their pro scouting, because, the Go Sens are ready to go,